Okay, before we get into this one, you're going to want to stay for every single second of it. Because what happened to Ilaria Fontaine on one single night in a ballroom she was never even invited to is the kind of story that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about family. Her bank flagged thousands of dollars draining from her account and traced it straight to a luxury ballroom downtown. She rushed to the venue, expecting to catch a professional identity thief red-handed. But when she walked through those doors, she found her own family, spending her money on a wedding they'd deliberately banned her from attending. Let's go back before the gown, back before the phone call, back to the beginning of a woman the world would soon find out was a lot harder to underestimate than anyone in her family ever gave her credit for. Ilaria Fontaine grew up the good daughter, the reliable one, the one who never asked for much and somehow always ended up giving everything anyway. If you'd walked into the Fontaine household growing up, you'd have seen two very different daughters being raised under one roof. Her younger sister, Corinne, got the birthday parties, the dance recitals with a front row full of relatives, the "we're so proud of you" energy, even when she hadn't done a single thing yet to earn it. Ilaria got told to be grateful. Grateful for what, exactly, she could never quite figure out. By the time she was 22, she was the one her parents called whenever the mortgage came up short. By 25, she was quietly wiring money to cover her father's failed business opportunities. That's what Garrick always called them, opportunities. Right up until they collapsed and somehow became her responsibility to clean up. Nobody ever said thank you. Nobody ever asked how she was doing. She was useful, a blank check with a heartbeat. And here's the part that still lingers, even now. She let it happen, for years. Because some small, stubborn part of her kept believing that if she just gave enough, proved enough, showed up enough, eventually they'd love her the way they loved her sister. They never did, so somewhere along the way, Ilaria stopped waiting for it. She built her own life, quietly, privately. She climbed into rooms her family didn't even know existed. Boardrooms, foundations, circles where nobody cared whose daughter she was, only what she could actually do. And in one of those rooms, she met a man who changed everything. His name was Shin Jin-hyuk. Now, nobody watching this should picture some ordinary businessman. He wasn't. Jin-hyuk ran an empire that operated almost entirely in the shadows most people never even knew existed. Shipping lanes, financial networks, security operations stretching across 3 continents. Some people called it underground. Ilaria called it untouchable. And the first time she saw him, across a private dinner neither of them particularly wanted to be at, she didn't feel danger. She felt seen. For the first time in her whole life, actually. Fully seen. They married quietly, no press, no family, just the two of them, and 2 witnesses who understood the meaning of discretion. And Ilaria made a decision that night she never once regretted. Her family would never know. Not because she was ashamed of him, because she refused to let them anywhere near something that actually mattered to her. She'd learned the hard way that every good thing she'd ever built, they eventually found a way to touch, to use, to drain. Not this one. This one was hers, completely. So while her parents were busy planning Corinne's next milestone, Ilaria was quietly building a life they had absolutely no idea about. A husband who would burn the world down before letting anyone touch her, protection they couldn't even begin to comprehend. And for a while, it worked. She stayed in her lane. They stayed in theirs, distant, cold, honestly, if you're being real about it, but safe. She had no idea how fast that safety was about to shatter, because 2 months before that night, her family went quiet, not busy quiet, not life happens quiet, cold, deliberate, don't answer the phone quiet. And if you've ever had people you love vanish on you with no explanation, you already know that silence is louder than any argument could ever be. Ilaria told herself it was nothing, told herself she was being paranoid. What she didn't know was that the silence wasn't distance. It was preparation. Weeks earlier, during a rare visit to drop off a birthday gift, Ilaria had left her bag on the kitchen counter for less than 10 minutes while she stepped out to take a call. Long enough, Odessa had photographed the card, front and back, and quietly passed the numbers to Corinne, just in case they ever needed it. Neither of them had called it stealing yet. They called it a backup plan. She was wrong, and what she found out was so much worse than anything she could have imagined. Stay with this, because here's where it really starts. This is the night everything cracked open. It was a Thursday. Ilaria remembered that detail clearly, because she'd just come from the Whitfield Foundation Gala, one of those elegant, exhausting corporate charity dinners where you smile for 4 hours straight and your face aches by the time you finally get home. She was still in her gown, royal blue, satin, the kind of dress that makes a person feel like nothing in the world could touch them. One shoe already off, wine in hand, finally exhaling for the first time all day. And then her phone rang. Not a random number, not spam. It was her private wealth manager, the woman who handles the kind of accounts that don't get random late-night check-ins. Ilaria's stomach dropped before the woman even said a word, because people like her do not call at 11 at night unless something is very, very wrong. Ilaria, the voice said, careful, controlled, the tone reserved for news that's about to wreck someone. I need you to confirm some activity on your card, immediately. Ilaria sat up straight, wine forgotten. What kind of activity? That's when she heard the words that turned her whole body cold. There's been a series of large transactions, back to back, starting about 40 minutes ago. Florists, catering, a venue deposit. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars, and it's still happening right now. Still happening. Right now. While Ilaria sat there in her gown with one shoe off, someone, somewhere, was spending her money like it belonged to them. She asked the only question that mattered. Where? Her manager gave her an address downtown. One of those luxury venues. The kind that doesn't take walk-ins. The kind with a name that makes you picture chandeliers before you even see them. Ilaria had never heard of it. Never been there. Which meant one thing to her in that moment. Somebody had cloned her card, or hacked her account, and was living their best life on her dime while she sat there completely clueless. Her hands started shaking, not from fear, from fury. Because here's the thing about a woman who spent her whole life being used. She develops a very specific kind of rage the moment she realizes it's happening again, somewhere she can't even see. And Ilaria was done. Done being the quiet one, done letting things simply happen to her. She hadn't even hung up the phone before she heard footsteps behind her. Jin Hyuk. He didn't ask what was wrong first. He never did. He just read the room, read her, and moved. He was already half into his jacket, phone in hand, eyes locked on hers with that particular stillness he got right before something serious was about to happen. The kind of calm that's honestly more unsettling than yelling ever could be. Talk to me, he said. 2 words. That's all it ever took with him. Ilaria told him everything, fast. The transactions, the venue, the fact that whoever was doing this had already spent more in 40 minutes than most people make in a month. She watched his expression shift into something she only saw maybe once or twice a year. Focus. Total, surgical focus. He didn't ask if she was sure. He didn't ask if maybe it was a mistake. He simply moved, already dialing before she'd finished her sentence, speaking low and fast in a mix of English and Korean to someone on the other end. Someone Ilaria knew, from the tone of his voice alone, was already pulling up systems most people don't even know exist. Because here's something worth understanding about her husband. When it comes to threats against the people he loves, he doesn't wait for permission. He doesn't wait for police reports or fraud departments or 24 to 48 business hours. He has his own network, his own people. And within minutes, literal minutes, his private intelligence team had already pulled live merchant terminal data. Not a guess, not an estimate. an exact, real-time signal, pinging off a payment processor inside that same downtown venue. "They're still there," Jin-hyuk said, voice flat, eyes locked on his screen. "Whoever's doing this, they haven't left." Something about the way he said it made the hair rise on Ilaria's arms, because that meant this wasn't some ghost hacker sitting behind a laptop 3 states away. This was someone standing inside that ballroom, right now, actively spending her money in real time. Ilaria made a decision in that exact second. She wasn't calling the bank in the morning. She wasn't waiting for a case number. She was going, tonight. In this dress, in these heels, mascara probably halfway down her face from exhaustion, she didn't care. She grabbed her coat, grabbed her clutch, and by the time she turned around, Jin-hyuk already had the car pulled to the front of the house. He didn't try to stop her. He never did. He just opened the door, looked at her with that unreadable calm, and said 4 words she felt land in her chest. "I'll be right behind you." Now, if you already know how these stories usually go, you're probably bracing for it. Trust anyone who's heard this before. Nothing could have prepared Ilaria for what she was about to walk into. The drive downtown felt like it took forever, and no time at all at once. She stared out the window, replaying every possible scenario in her head. A cloned card, a skimmer at some gas station, an employee at the gala who'd gotten a little too close to her clutch. Anything felt more believable than what was actually waiting for her. The car pulled up outside the venue, and for a second, Ilaria just sat there, staring at it. It was gorgeous. Ridiculously gorgeous. Golden light spilling out of tall, arched windows. Valet attendants in crisp black vests. The kind of place that screams money the second you look at it. Which honestly should have been the first clue that whoever was doing this had expensive taste and zero fear of getting caught. She stepped out of the car, still in her gown, heels clicking against the pavement, moving with a kind of urgency that made a few heads turn. She wasn't thinking about how she looked. She was thinking about catching whoever was inside before they disappeared into the night with thousands more of her money. Security at the door barely stopped her. One look at her face, and they could clearly tell she wasn't there for the appetizers. She walked in like she owned the place, like she had every right to be there. In a way, she did. She was the one paying for it, after all. The lobby alone should have told her something was off. Floral arrangements taller than she was. Gold accents on literally everything. The chairbacks, the drapery, the little place card holders sitting on a welcome table near the entrance. This wasn't some quiet little gathering. This was a full-blown, no-expense-spared event. And that's when the dread hit her, crawling up the back of her neck. Because skimmers don't book florists. Hackers don't rent out venues with crystal chandeliers and hire full wait staff. Whoever was doing this wasn't some random criminal. This was planned, coordinated. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly whose money they were spending to do it. Ilaria stood there for a second, just past the entrance, feeling a cold, creeping realization start to build in her stomach. Something about the flowers. Something about the specific shade of gold. It all felt familiar. Too familiar. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself there was no way. And then she heard it. Music, drifting from somewhere down the hall to her left. And under it, laughter. Not stranger laughter. Not generic party noise. A specific laugh. One she would know anywhere, because she'd grown up hearing it across a dinner table for 20-something years. Her mother's laugh. Ilaria's feet moved before her brain even caught up. She didn't decide to walk toward that sound. She just did. Heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Heels echoing against the marble floor. Past waitstaff carrying trays of champagne. Past a sign on an easel she walked right by without reading. Too busy chasing a sound she was praying she was imagining. She turned the corner into the main reception room, and everything stopped. The room opened up into a massive, glittering space, string lights overhead, Round tables dressed in ivory linen, candles flickering everywhere you looked. And right in the center of it all, under a spotlight, spinning slowly in a dress made of layer after layer of white lace, was her sister, Corinne, in a wedding gown, dancing, laughing, radiant, in the exact way brides are supposed to look on the best night of their lives. Ilaria stood frozen in that doorway, feeling something inside her chest crack clean in half, because in that one single second, every piece slipped into place. The flowers, the gold, the venue, the transactions, the silence from her family for the past 2 months. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a mix-up. This was her sister's wedding, a wedding she was never invited to, a wedding she didn't even know was happening, a wedding that, as horrifying as it sounds, she was apparently paying for, one stolen swipe at a time. Ilaria felt her whole body go numb, standing there in her blue gown at the edge of a party celebrating a life-changing moment her own family had decided she didn't deserve to witness. And underneath the shock, something darker started rising up in her. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was a family who had looked her dead in the eye, decided she wasn't worth a seat at the table, and then had the audacity to steal from her to pay for the table they excluded her from. She hadn't even taken her next breath yet, hadn't even moved. And that's exactly the moment her phone started buzzing again, inside her clutch. If you think that room was already spinning for her, you have absolutely no idea what's about to happen next. Because what she's about to walk toward, right now, at that head table, is about to blow this entire family wide open. Don't look away for what's coming. Don't stop now. Because everything up until this point was just the setup. What happens in the next few minutes is the part people talk about long after the video ends. So stay with this. There is no version of this story where it ends quietly. Ilaria stood in the doorway for maybe 2 seconds longer than she should have, just staring, watching her sister spin in that dress. Watching her mother clap along from her seat like this was the most natural thing in the world. Watching a room full of people celebrate a moment they'd all agreed she didn't deserve to witness. 2 seconds. That's all the shock got to keep, because right after that, something else took over. Something colder. Something that had been sitting quiet inside her for years, waiting for exactly this moment to finally stand up. She started walking. Not storming, not screaming, just walking in her royal blue gown, heels clicking against that marble floor in a slow, deliberate rhythm that somehow cut through the music before she'd even said a word. Maybe it was the dress, maybe it was the look on her face, but people started noticing her before she'd even gotten close to the head table. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. That specific kind of silence that spreads through a room right before something breaks. Her mother saw her first. Odessa, sitting there in a gold sequined gown, pearls at her throat, looking every bit the proud mother of the bride, right up until her eyes landed on Ilaria. Her face did something nobody at that table had ever seen it do before. Not anger, not even guilt at first, just pure, unfiltered horror. The kind of horror you can't fake, because the body reacts before the brain even catches up with what's happening. Because there, sitting right in front of her on that ivory linen tablecloth, was Ilaria's card, her black card, her name, her account, her life, lying there next to a centerpiece of white roses like it was just another prop for the evening. Odessa hadn't even had the decency to hide it. Hadn't thought, not even for 1 second, that the daughter she'd banned from this wedding might actually walk through that door and see it with her own eyes. Ilaria stopped right at the edge of the table, didn't sit, didn't smile, just stood there, looking down at her own mother, waiting for her to say something. Anything, Ilaria. Her mother's voice came out thin, cracked, like saying her name out loud might somehow make her disappear. What are you doing here? For a second, Ilaria almost laughed. Out of every question her mother could have asked in that moment, that was the one she picked. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Let me explain." Just, "What are you doing here?" Like Ilaria was the one who didn't belong. "What am I doing here?" Ilaria repeated, slow, letting every word land. Her eyes dropped straight to the card, inches from her mother's hand. "That's interesting, because I was about to ask you the exact same thing." She watched her mother's hand twitch toward the card, like hiding it now would fix anything. "This isn't what it looks like," Odessa started. "And if there's $1 for every time someone in that family opened a sentence with exactly those words, Ilaria could have retired years ago." "Really?" Ilaria said, voice level, controlled. Because if she let even a little of what she was actually feeling leak out right then, she wasn't sure she'd be able to stop it. "Because it looks exactly like my card, sitting on my sister's wedding table, at a wedding I wasn't invited to." The music had all but died by now, eyes from every direction, guests leaning in, waitstaff slowing near the edges of the room, pretending to check on things they clearly didn't need to check on. This wasn't a private conversation anymore. It was a scene, and everyone in that room knew it. Corinne had stopped dancing. She stood frozen a few feet away in her gown, veil slightly crooked, staring at Ilaria like she'd seen a ghost. Maybe, in a way, she had. Because nobody in that family had ever pictured a version of tonight where Ilaria actually showed up. "You need to lower your voice," Odessa hissed, glancing around at the guests like Ilaria's presence was the embarrassing part of this entire situation. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" Ilaria let a little heat into her voice, because some things simply cannot be said calmly. "You stole from me to pay for a wedding you deliberately hid from me, and I'm the one making a scene?" That's when her father decided to get involved. Garrick shot up from his chair so fast it nearly toppled backward, one hand slapping flat against the table hard enough to rattle the wine glasses. Even in the retelling, that sound is loud. The same loud, booming voice he'd used on Ilaria as a teenager, whenever she dared ask a question he didn't want to answer. "That's enough, Ilaria." His voice thundered across the reception, sharp and furious. "You are ruining your sister's night. Is that what you came here to do? Humiliate this family in front of everyone? Humiliate this family." Ilaria let that phrase sit in the air for a second, because the audacity of it nearly took her breath away. Like she was the villain in this story. Like showing up to confront the people who stole from her was somehow worse than the theft itself. "Humiliate you?" she said, her voice dropping quieter now, which somehow scared him more than if she'd screamed. "You banned me from this wedding. You cut me out completely, and then you used my money, my actual bank account, to pay for the exact celebration I wasn't allowed to attend." "I didn't come here to humiliate anyone, Dad. You did that part all on your own." He opened his mouth to fire back, that familiar red creeping up his neck the way it always did, right before he raised his voice past the point of no return. He never got the chance, because that's exactly when the venue manager walked up. Tall, dark suit, the practiced smile of someone in hospitality who knows a room is one wrong word away from falling apart. He carried a small leather folder against his chest, and Odessa's face shifted the second she saw him coming, like she already knew, somewhere deep down, exactly what he was about to say. "So sorry to interrupt," he said, voice smooth, clearly trying to keep things pleasant for as long as humanly possible. "We just need to finalize the remaining balance before the night wraps up. It's just a formality." He flipped the folder open, glanced at a slip of paper inside. "The outstanding total comes to $28,000. $28,000. The number landed heavy across the table, said out loud in front of an entire room like it was nothing. Odessa's hand shot toward the card so fast she nearly knocked over a candle, snatching it up like speed alone could undo everything that had already happened. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile toward the manager that didn't come close to reaching her eyes. "1 second." She handed him the card, fingers trembling, visibly, slightly. Up until this exact moment, some small part of Ilaria had still hoped there was an explanation. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she was about to feel foolish for jumping to conclusions. That hope died the second the manager slid the card into the little portable machine, and everyone at that table went completely still, watching, waiting, because Ilaria already knew something they didn't. She knew the moment Jin Hyuk's team had traced those transactions, they hadn't just tracked them. They'd acted, and knowing exactly how fast his people moved when it came to protecting what was hers, that account hadn't just been flagged. It had been frozen. Completely. Mid-reception. The little machine beeped. Then beeped again. The manager's smile faltered as he glanced at the screen. "I'm sorry. It says declined. Let me try that again." He ran it a second time. Same beep. Same word. Glowing right there on the little screen, for everyone at that table to see. Declined. Odessa's face drained of color. "That can't be right," she said, voice climbing an octave, snatching the card back out of his hand like she personally needed to inspect it. "Try it again. There's obviously some kind of error." He ran it a third time. Declined. Garrick's jaw tightened. Corinne's hands flew up to cover her mouth. Terrence, Ilaria's brother, standing off to the side in his tuxedo, went rigid, some instinct already telling him this wasn't just a technical glitch. "This is unacceptable," Garrick snapped, rounding on the poor manager like this whole situation was somehow his fault. "Do you know who we are? Try a different machine." Ilaria could have let it keep going, could have stood there and watched them scramble and panic and humiliate themselves in front of an entire ballroom. Some exhausted, petty part of her almost wanted to. She didn't need to say a single word, because her phone chose that exact moment to ring, not a soft little chime. Loud, full volume, the way it does when someone forgets to switch off silent mode after leaving the house in a hurry. It buzzed and rang right there on the linen table where she'd set it down without thinking, screen lighting up bright against the white tablecloth, cutting through the tension like a blade. Every head at that table turned toward the sound at once, glowing on the screen for everyone to see. Husband, with a little blue heart right next to it. Up until this exact second, not one person at that table had any idea Ilaria was even married, let alone to who. "Husband?" Corinne whispered, voice barely audible, veil still crooked, staring at the phone like it might bite her. "Ilaria, you're married?" Ilaria didn't answer right away. She just looked down at the screen, at his name. At the little photo, the one he hates that she keeps saved, taken candidly one evening at home, jaw sharp, eyes dark, the expression he wore when he already knew exactly what was happening before anyone told him. Something settled in her chest, something steady. She picked up the phone. The whole table watched her do it. Watched her thumb hover for half a second over the screen, and then, deliberately, calmly, with a quiet satisfaction she probably shouldn't admit to enjoying as much as she did, she pressed speaker. His voice filled the space instantly, low, even, utterly composed. Ilaria, just her name, first, the way he always started. Checking, making sure she was okay before anything else mattered to him. "Are you safe?" "I'm safe," she said, watching her family's faces, process the sound of a voice none of them recognized, a voice that carried a weight none of them were prepared for. "I'm standing at the table right now." There was a pause, just long enough to feel deliberate. Then his tone shifted. Not louder, never louder. That wasn't how he operated. But colder, sharper. The kind of voice that made grown men in his world go very, very quiet. "Put me on with them." "You're on," Ilaria said. "Speaker, say hello." Jin Hyuk doesn't yell. He's never once raised his voice. Not in anger, not in frustration, not even in the middle of arguments most couples would be screaming through. His control is exactly what makes him terrifying, because when a man like that speaks calmly, it means he's already decided the outcome. He's not negotiating. He's informing you. Good evening, he said, and even through the phone speaker, sitting there on a linen tablecloth surrounded by wilting white roses and half-empty champagne flutes, his voice carried a weight that made the entire table lean back instinctively, like his presence had physically entered the room. I believe we haven't had the pleasure. Nobody answered. Let me help, he continued, unbothered by the silence. My name is Shin Jin-hyuk. I'm Ilaria's husband, and over the last 2 hours, my team has been tracking every transaction made on her card tonight. Florist, caterer, venue deposit, the band you hired. Every charge, time-stamped, logged, and traced directly back to this address. Odessa's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I want to be very clear about something, Jin-hyuk went on. What happened tonight wasn't a family disagreement. It wasn't a misunderstanding between relatives. You used my wife's financial credentials without her knowledge or consent, which means you didn't just steal from Ilaria. He paused, long enough that the silence itself felt heavy. You stole from my organization. That single sentence landed like a bomb. Nobody at that table needed it explained twice. Now, Jin-hyuk continued, tone calm, precise, moving straight past the shock. Here's what happens next. My people have already frozen the account you used. That's why your final payment declined. It stays frozen until the full amount is recovered. You can't just freeze, Garrick started, voice already shaking. I already have, Jin-hyuk cut in, flat, matter of fact. I'd encourage you not to test what else I'm capable of before this conversation is finished. My associates are positioned at every exit of this venue, he went on, and a few guests near the edges of the room glanced toward the doors without meaning to. Not to cause a scene, simply to make sure everyone stays put while this gets resolved properly. This is insane, Corinne whispered, taking a step back, veil trembling. This was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. And something in Ilaria's chest cracked, just slightly, hearing her sister say that. For a split second, old instincts flared. The instinct to soften, to protect, to fix things, the way she'd always been trained to do since she was old enough to understand what be useful cost in that house. But then she remembered. She remembered standing in that doorway, watching Corinne dance in a dress paid for with money stolen from an account she knew, she had to know, wasn't hers to touch. She remembered every invitation sent to relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, while hers simply never arrived. She remembered every time she'd quietly covered for this family, and how not one of them had ever once considered covering for her. So she didn't soften. You should have thought about that, she said, voice steady, before you decided my exclusion was worth building your happiest night around. Corinne flinched, like she'd been struck. Odessa, meanwhile, had apparently decided groveling was her best remaining option, turning toward the phone, voice pitching high and desperate. Please, Mr. Shin, or whatever your name is. This is just a family matter. We didn't mean any real harm. We were trying to protect her. Protect her. Jin-hyuk's voice didn't rise, but something underneath it went sharper. You excluded her from a family event, then drained her personal accounts to fund it, and you're describing that as protection. Silence. I've spent a great deal of time in rooms with people who lie for a living, he continued, almost conversationally, which somehow made it worse. I can promise you, that particular story isn't going to work on me. Odessa's face crumbled. Every ounce of composure she'd been clinging to finally gave out. After years of being the one who held everything together, absorbed every excuse, this didn't feel like cruelty to Ilaria. It felt like justice, finally, showing up on time for once. What happens now? Garrick asked, voice hollow. All the earlier bravado gone. Now, Jin-hyuk said, you're going to arrange full repayment of every dollar spent tonight, plus whatever fees the venue is owed for this evening's disruption. My legal team will be in contact within 24 hours with exact figures. Until that repayment clears in full, certain assets tied to this family will remain frozen. Consider it an incentive to move quickly. Assets, Odessa repeated, hollow. What assets? You'll find out very soon, Jin Hyuk said, and something about the calm certainty in his voice made it clear this wasn't a threat he was making up on the spot. It was already happening. By now, half the room had stopped even pretending not to listen. Guests stood frozen near their tables, waitstaff hovering at the edges with trays they'd forgotten they were holding. The band long gone silent. Every eye in that ballroom locked on the head table, watching a family's carefully curated night collapse in real time. That's when the groom's family made their move. Ilaria hadn't even registered them until that moment. His parents, seated a few tables over, dressed impeccably, clearly having spent the entire evening enjoying what they thought was a beautiful, uncomplicated celebration. The second the words, frozen assets, and criminal organization started floating through the air, they exchanged one quick, panicked glance. Then, quietly, efficiently, they started gathering their things. No scene, no confrontation, just a swift, practiced exit. Coats grabbed, murmurs about needing to leave early, the groom steered by the elbow toward the nearest exit before this situation could attach itself to their family name any further. He glanced back once, torn, caught between the woman he'd just married and parents who had zero interest in sticking around to find out how deep this went. He left with them. Corinne watched her new husband walk out of her own wedding reception without so much as a backward glance, and something in her face finally broke completely. All that radiant, spinning joy from earlier drained out of her entirely, leaving behind someone who looked, for the first time all night, exactly her age. Young, scared, completely out of her depth in a situation she'd helped create and had no idea how to fix. Jin Hyuk, Ilaria said quietly, because as satisfying as some petty part of her found all of this, she needed to bring it to a close. I think that's enough. There was a brief pause on the line. Are you certain? I'm certain. Very well. His voice softened, though it still carried that same unmistakable authority underneath. I'll have a car meet you at the front entrance in 5 minutes. I'll be there. The call ended. For a long moment, nobody at that table said a single word. The silence stretched out, heavy, the kind that follows when every mask in a room has been ripped away at once, and nobody quite knows how to look at each other anymore. Ilaria looked at her mother, still holding that declined black card, like it might somehow start working again if she just believed hard enough. She looked at her father, slumped slightly in his chair, all that booming authority replaced by something smaller and more honest. She looked at Corinne, standing alone in her wedding dress in the middle of an empty dance floor, husband gone, family exposed, celebration destroyed. And for the first time in her entire life, Ilaria didn't feel guilty for any of it. She picked her card up off the table, slid it back into her clutch, slow, deliberate, making sure every single person there watched her do it. I hope it was worth it, she said, voice quiet now. All the fury from earlier settled into something colder, something final. Whatever this cost you, the wedding, tonight, all of it. I hope, somewhere in there, it was worth losing me completely. Nobody answered. There was nothing left to say. She turned, and she walked out. She didn't look back once, not at her mother, not at her father, not even at Corinne standing there in the wreckage of her own wedding night, because she already knew, somewhere deep down, that walking away from that table meant walking away from all of it. Every obligation, every ounce of guilt she'd carried since she was old enough to understand what being useful cost her. Every version of herself that used to shrink smaller just to make room for people who never once made room for her. The valet had a car waiting exactly where Jin Hyuk said it would be. Black, sleek, engine already running. Leaning against the passenger door, jacket still half-buttoned from when he'd left the house in a rush hours earlier, was her husband. He didn't say anything right away, just opened his arms, and Ilaria walked straight into them, letting herself finally exhale for what felt like the first time all night. He smelled like home, felt like safety. Two things she'd apparently spent her entire life searching for in the wrong place. "You didn't have to come," she murmured against his chest. "Yes," he said simply, voice quiet now. None of that cold authority left in it. Just him, just her husband. "I did." They stood there for a long moment, just breathing, the sound of that ballroom's chaos fading further behind them with every second. Standing there in the cool night air, still wearing that royal blue gown from a party that felt like it happened a lifetime ago, Ilaria understood, for the first time in her life, what it felt like to be truly, completely protected. Not obligated, not useful, protected. The weeks that followed moved fast. Jin-hyuk's legal team handled exactly what he'd promised. Full repayment demanded. Assets frozen until every dollar cleared. Consequences stretching far beyond anything her family had ever imagined possible when they decided stealing from her was an acceptable shortcut. She heard, secondhand, through people who still somehow felt compelled to keep her updated, that her parents had to sell property to cover what they owed. That Corinne's marriage barely survived the scandal, the groom's family keeping their distance for months afterward, embarrassed by an association they never wanted attached to their name. Ilaria didn't feel joy hearing any of it, but she didn't feel guilt either. For the first time in her life, she simply felt free. Free from the weight of being everyone's safety net. Free from waiting for a family that was never going to show up the way she needed them to. Free to build a life fully, completely, on her own terms, with a man who valued her not for what she could give, but simply for who she was. She thinks about that night sometimes. The gown, the card, the declined machine. Her husband's voice cutting through that ballroom like something out of a story nobody would believe if you told it straight. And every single time, she lands on the same thought. Some families will only ever see you clearly once you finally stop giving them a reason to look away. Hers did. Eventually. Just far too late for it to matter anymore. And honestly, she's made peace with that. Because she didn't lose a family that night in that ballroom. She finally found out she never really had one to begin with. If this story hit you somewhere, if you felt that shift right along with her, from shock to fury, to finally walking away with her head held high, do us a favor and let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And if you want more stories exactly like this one, make sure you're subscribed to Quinn's Afro-Korea Diaries. Because trust us, this is far from the last time a quiet woman turns out to be the most powerful person in the room. Thank you, genuinely, for staying until the very end. It means more than you know.